Good evening, dear compatriots. Noyan Dupan is on the air. Our guest is Geragin Chukasesian, a member of the Council of the National Democratic Alliance. Good evening, Mr. Chukasesian. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Good evening. I thank you also.
Today, we will discuss a wide range of issues. What is Nikol Pashinyan's real goal when he questions the constitution and claims that the need for a new constitution is on the agenda, which needs broad public discourse? What is wrong with our constitution? Why do we need to change it? Besides changing the constitution, he wants to change the Declaration of Independence, the national anthem, history of Armenians to history of Armenia. Why are these changes necessary?
Pashinyan justifies his proposal and says that we need a new constitution to address both external and internal legitimacy concerns. He says that there is a problem of internal legitimacy. In other words, no results of referendums on previous constitutions were legitimate from the people's point of view. Therefore, it is crucial to assure the people that the new constitution has fundamental legitimacy. Besides, there is also a problem of external legitimacy due to changes in the international situation. As Pashinyan's teammates say, the foundation of our statehood, i.e. the Declaration of Independence, has collapsed, and the state needs a new basis to adapt to new realities and gain legitimacy in those new realities. The term legitimate has been overused and has become a devalued word. Sometimes, it is even unclear to our people what the word legitimate means. However, the term has multiple meanings, and our language allows translating such ambiguous words into their several meanings. One of those meanings is to make something legal, or to legalize. You have to legalize something if it is not yet legal, and you bring it into the realm of law and make it lawful. There is another meaning of the term, that is when you substantiate and justify the existence of something. Manipulators often misuse this term, endlessly repeat it to create labyrinths in the brains of people, thus confusing them in realizing their goals. In other words, the task is to convince the people and justify the basis on which they are building the state. He says the declaration is no longer a working document but an archival one, and a new working constitution is required as the previous one is no longer effective. He assures us that we need a working document for our state machine to work well. Therefore, they are trying to push their agenda forward on this basis. Let us find the underlying cause of this issue and see what is true and what a half-truth here, as a half-truth is more dangerous than lies. There is indeed some truth in what they say. Our 30-year-old statehood is bankrupt now. Therefore, it is necessary to go back and understand where the mistakes were, correct them, and learn from them. Yes, our state machine is bankrupt, but by taking advantage of this truth, they are honing the idea of replacing the built-on-sand statehood of post-Soviet Armenia with another built-on-sand statehood. Our Declaration of Independence was incomplete from the very beginning. The past 30 years showed that incompleteness. That imperfection led us to this condition. Armenians, as a nation, were not politically mature enough to understand what was happening to them then. Interestingly, Georgians and Azerbaijanis had better state thinking because they justified and declared themselves as successors of their states of 1918. However, the Russians forced us to accept that we were the successors of Soviet Armenia, even though it was not a recognized state. On the other hand, unlike Georgia and Azerbaijan, our first republic was a recognized state by the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, and as such had a legitimate statehood status. The Russians forced us to accept that we were the successors of Soviet Armenia because of their commitment to the Moscow Treaty, where they pledge allegiance toward Turkey at the expense of Armenia. They made us overlook this issue accept that we were the successors of Soviet Armenia, and build our statehood on that basis. Now, we have reached the point where Azerbaijan is challenging the legal basis on which we should carry out the demarcation of our borders and fix our territorial integrity. They refuse to accept the borders of Soviet Armenia, since they rightfully state that the so-called Soviet states were occupied by Bolshevik Russia. Meanwhile, the Armenian people recently discovered that Armenia never sent the Armenian parliament's reservations made in the 1991 Alma-Ata Declaration. Hence, the reservations of the Armenian people are not valid anymore. Moreover, in his statement, Pashinyan mentioned that he had been attempting to find out for quite some time whether the custodian responsible for holding official documents had preserved them. However, he has not found the reservations made by Armenia and did not take any legal action to investigate why they did not send that particular document from Armenia.
So Armenia did not send the reservations we had when we adopted this declaration?
Right. We see what manipulations have taken place over the years in connection with Armenia's statehood, starting with the adoption of the Declaration of Independence and ending with the Declaration of Alma-Ata. It is an endless history of machinations of a fake statehood. That history was full of deception and manipulations during the last 30 years. Therefore, it is essential to go back and understand where it all started. The starting point was the separation of the Artsakh issue from the Armenian cause. The Armenian cause was not a historical or fatal misfortune which we had to forget and start from scratch. The Artsakh issue was part of the Armenian cause and had to be resolved in that context. Starting from scratch is impossible because it takes us back to the same point where we surrendered. Azerbaijan claims to be the successor of their first republic. They say that their borders back then included Syanik, the eastern bank of Sevan, and other territories. They assure that they still hold the documents proving that they had applied to the League of Nations on that issue. It is ridiculous that no one responds to Aliev's rhetoric from Armenia. No one states that if Azerbaijan is the successor of its first republic, then let us see which of us was a legally recognized state by that time and with what borders. Armenia has all the documents to prove their rights to those lands, but all consecutive governments of Armenia have concealed them from the public. Even today, when we talk about the Treaty of Sèvres or Woodrow Wilson's arbitral award, the Turks or Azerbaijanis say that there is no such organization now as the League of Nations. They say, we exist on this land and are the real owners. In other words, they move from the legal field to the force field because they have nothing to do in the field of law. The existence of those documents assumes legal continuation. The International Court can decide on the issue. However, the leadership of the last 30 years representing the Armenian people has remained silent on this issue. Why? It is clear that at Moscow's behest, if we break the silence, they will have to turn to the Lenin-Ataturk Treaty, which, like the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, was illegal. In other words, our country has been an occupied country. We cannot ignore that fact. If we keep silent, they will consequently present us as an aggressor country. Moreover, they will demand contributions of hundreds of billions of dollars saying that we invaded the land and destroyed it for 30 years. Instead, we can go back to 1920 and say that the Soviet army occupied our country, and the Soviet government gave those lands to Azerbaijan. We can submit a claim and sue for contributions ourselves. However, nobody did it, and nobody does it now. They silence the issue and cover it with smoke. Moreover, they divert the discourse and take the issue from the right basis to a completely different place. Pashinyan scolds us saying that we always talk about history. We do not think about the future and do not take into consideration the fact that we have to deal with the bulls.
Let's not forget that Pashinyan announced that we do not have a cadaster paper.
Yes, that is exactly what we are talking about. If we solve this problem in the field of law, We will have to reveal those documents and start a judicial process.
However, Pashinyan says he does not have any documents.
Pashinyan may not say much, but we, as a nation, know that these papers exist. Somebody has wrapped them up like Pipo's promissory note and has thrown them away in the corner as useless pieces of paper. However, we have those papers, but Azerbaijan does not.
Azerbaijan declares that the Soviet army had occupied their country. Do we have somewhere mentioned that we were also an occupied country?
Yes. The 1959 law of the United States declares Armenia as one of the occupied countries. Let me remind you that Armenia had an embassy in the USA until 1933. In 30 years, no one was interested in what happened to the land of the Armenian embassy in the United States. How did it happen that an African country owned that land? It is a serious question. It was an Armenian territory, but no one raised these questions. If they opened that coil, they would get the answer of who was the occupied country then and what injustice was committed against Armenia. However, today's authorities say that historical injustices or our history is a legal layer, and we should treat them as we treat something knitted by our grandmother. Just like keeping them as reminiscence, putting them somewhere, and remembering about them sometimes, and only when we get stronger on this 29,800 square kilometers, we will take out those papers back and talk. In other words, they are trying to convince the people that we should gain time, get stronger, and talk about those papers later. Do not talk about them now. Do not incite the bulls, they say.
Instead of talking about those documents, we say we do not have a cadaster paper. Why? They say our constitution is illegitimate. Here a question arises. Do we live in an illegitimate country having an illegitimate constitution? Is that what we have? What should we do? Should we give up everything and surrender?
The fact is that when you sow fear among people, you cause confusion, especially when you try to strip them of their values. Those values are not just one or two.
Okay, but why do they do that?
Nikol answers that question. He says he has reached an agreement with Aliev on creating a new reality. These are his words. They will use a new language and a new lexicon. They will apply new logic and new formulas. The smokescreen covering these formulas, which assume no legitimacy, is more than a distraction. They depreciate the values for which the people fought and their will to fight for them. Not only have we gone through human or territorial losses, but also we have lost the will to fight. Now, they want to back it all up with papers, as they have to convince the people to pass under Aliev's sword by this referendum. They do not want the people to become the subject of this new law. They make the people subject to violence, instead of being a citizen. To fulfill this process, they carry out machinations, deceptions, and frauds as they are outstanding thimble riggers and they know how to play with their fingers. Today they say one thing, tomorrow quite a different one. They trick, and we all are being tricked. This is another episode of hybrid warfare, psychological warfare against our people.
Mr. Chukasesian, speaking about Pashinyan's proposal on changing the constitution, you said that he has made promises and has some agreements. Some political analysts say that we should do it if we want to avoid war. You say there is an agreement to start from scratch, and they want us to pass under the sword. What does it mean to start from scratch? Will Azerbaijan stop then? Every day, we hear that soon the war will start. In my programs, I have twice quoted one of the famous Russian analysts, a propagandist, who says that if not within hours, the war will start within a few days. They create tension, implying that if we do not take some steps, it will start. You are talking about hybrid war. Well, they want to affect us and make us scared. What about Pashinyan? Is he committed to that same process? Is he affected? Does he want to scare the people? Does he believe that the peace era will start if we change the constitution and remove the mountain Ararat from our blazon? Is it his idea? Is he also a victim of that hybrid war? Does he want to convince the people that if we do not take such steps, Aliev will start the war? While we are not ready for that war.
No matter what the reason is for that, we should consider the result. What will we get as a result? The situation is very similar to one historical episode in France. During World War II, the Vichy collaborator power in France undertook an obligation to the victor to eliminate all grounds for the rematch and revenge and restoration of the sovereignty that France had before. However, the resistance movement, Free France, or the movement of de Gaulle were against the government's approach. The same thing happened in Armenia in the 1920s, when the Moscow and Kars treaties contained articles by which Armenia held an obligation to prevent any nationalist manifestations against the Turks. That is what they did. They annihilated all the participants of the liberation movement within 20 years so that there was not even a bud of resistance left. What we have today is the new wave of neo-Bolshevism, which collaboratively wants to eliminate any such possibility. They have started with history, textbooks, and education so that the people do not suddenly try to restore their values. When you identify the homeland with the state, you politicize the idea of the homeland, which is a much higher idea than the political idea. That is the raison d'etre of a nation. The homeland is quite a different concept. Thus, you relegate the motherland to an inferior level when you say that your value is the state and all other values are false. The state is a tool, while the motherland is a value. By this, you turn the state from a tool into a value. The state is an instrument that should serve a value. The state is a derived value, and it should serve your national identity and vision, native ideas, which are eternal and not temporal. Pashinyan says, do not talk about the history and the past, talk about the future. It is a kind of manipulation. We, as a nation, are not dealing with temporal concepts but with the nation's values, signification, and sacraments, for which we exist and carry out our mission. Otherwise, if the purpose is the state, many Armenians will say, let us go and serve the value and significance of another state, which is a much more meaningful state. Why should they stay and serve a state that has no values? Pashinyan does not say why Armenians should stay in this country and give blood for their homeland. Why should they do that if there is no meaning? When these values are depreciated, the will to resist also disappears. Therefore, regardless of whether they do it consciously or not, I do not think they do it unconsciously. There is a big machine at work. Pashinyan is not the only one supplying this ideology.
They say it is the price of peace. They demand that we should forget our history and values. They even use the term denazification, which means to forget national values. Is this the price of peace?
Recently, the ambassador of Iran clearly stated that peace is achieved only through balance. Only balance is the guarantee of peace. Even if you have written everything on paper, it cannot make any difference. Because recently Aliev justified himself by saying, we had the right to occupy Artsakh by force. And it was an act of self-defense. Just like that, tomorrow he can say, We have the right to use force to defend our enclaves. Your paper will no longer have any importance then. You can surrender as much as you want. Today you give what they want. Tomorrow they will demand something else. In other words, infecting our people with the mentality that we must give something to avoid war and maintain peace, so that not to let them cut our tree down, does not work.
What do we have to counterbalance it?
We have Hovhannes Tumanyan's fairy tale for that, where the crow says that the fox cannot cut your tree down. Do not be afraid, because the fox is afraid of others. You just have to go to those others who scare the fox.
However, it requires desire, knowledge, and consciousness.
That is why you need to get rid of the colonization of your consciousness. With this kind of rhetoric, they are colonizing the consciousness of our people. Our enemy uses this method to deprive the Armenian people of the will and ability to resist. Now I would like to speak about one more thing, as it relates to your programs. During one of them, I heard somebody saying that the fifth column is saying the same things as we do. I would like to explain to those people that we are talking about something quite different. We say that the foundation on which we built our statehood during these 30 years was flawed, and we have reached this point because of that imperfection. Therefore, we say yes, we need to change the Constitution, but we should do it when this government resigns. We are not against making changes. We are against making changes right now. After this government resigns, we should establish a transitional government and constitutionality. Only after that, we can create a new constitution, quite a different one and in a different way. However, the way they want to do it now leads to chaos or creating a fake state to maintain their power. Thus, they are making the Armenian people face this dilemma today. However, it is a false dilemma, either chaos and war or a fake state that has no values, no significance, and no meaning. People will start to leave such a country, as it will not have a future. Another thing to say is that there are tigers versus bulls. There are other animals in the world. We are eagles. We are not poor and miserable. The eagle has claws and wings, and it knows how to fly. Our approach is completely different from the approach of the fifth column. However, they say our approaches coincide. Where is the coincidence here? We have been saying for years that the independent sovereign is the source of law in Armenia. Without that sovereign in the law, talking about the constitution is a waste of time. Where is the based on law sovereign? Gostin Zarian says, the life of a nation is legitimized by its myths because they provide the norms of behavior that give meaning to the existence of the people. When we speak about this, they counter us that we go back to the depths of history instead of speaking about the future. However, it is not history, but the dominant light that gives meaning to our existence. Without that meaning, we merely will maintain a biological existence only. Recently I came across an interesting formulation and thought about how active their propaganda machine is pushing their ideas. The author wrote, "Why do you want Ararat? What is Ararat? Just a deformation of the Earth's crust. Who needs it?" In the 1930s, when Sharants had overcome the severe disease of Bolshevism, he wrote his work, To the Mount Massis, where he describes Kachator Abovian's climbing to Ararat at the end of his life. There he gives the formulas for the existence of the Armenian people, and for what they exist. He explains the meaning and sacraments of the high, glacial Ararat, the mysteries without which the Armenian nation cannot exist. The people who are pushing the agenda of forgetting Ararat have limited intellect at best. I say at best because there are probably agents among them too, because they are promoting the Turkish agenda in Armenia. I assume that there are also naive people among them who have a poor understanding of what is going on. People with such limited thinking who call for rational analysis of our history and for renouncing some episodes of our history do not realize that this is not a natural science. This is an area where very high psychological and mental capacity is required. Our people are not of the level to be put in the shoes of an idiot. You cannot deceive the people that soon we will be stronger and then we will start talking about justice and our historical rights. The enemy is not an idiot. He knows exactly what he wants and what he is doing. He wants to cut down our tree from its base.
In other words, we will never become stronger even if we adopt a new constitution, renounce the old values, change the blazon, have a state instead of homeland, history of Armenia instead of Armenian history.
There is an important point here. In Eastern martial arts, there is one called Japanese Aikido. There the forces are unequal. A smaller force fights against a larger force, initiating an attack. The smaller force, taking advantage of the larger one's motion, tries to apply a throwing technique to neutralize the attack, to keep him off balance and knock him down. Our approach, as NDA, is the same. It is great that the Prime Minister has opened up this discourse and has set in motion all the inertia of 30 years. Our people have the opportunity now to bring the center of gravity of that larger power in motion actively into a state of instability for a very small amount of time. It will be a trap for them if the active force reaches a certain critical mass and enters the struggle. Unlike those who think that we should not speak about it, I think that it is highly necessary to talk if they have opened this discourse. We need to talk about the substratum of our identity, our cultural and spiritual foundations that legitimize our existence as a nation.
In other words, we should reevaluate what we have and rethink it.
Yes, and it is a renewal condition for the forces that nourish, warm, and renew our resistance and self-defense core abilities.
You said we should distinguish the true values from those offered by the false state. They tend to change and break the existing values by today's discourse, but you consider it positive as it creates a will to rethink, re-evaluate, and protect our real values. You say there are agents. Of course, it is the easiest thing to blame one another. However, take interviews, and I know it very well. A kind of lustration has taken place, but let us leave the agents aside. In case we all have a common goal to protect our statehood, our motherland, can we reach a point where all the forces will unite to break those fakes, deceptions, manipulations, and sophistry? Is it possible in our reality, or we will never achieve it?
The point is that in this perceptual phase, the lustration, the light up, the illumination will certainly take place, and we will see who leads where. Those forces that naively have appeared in other camps will be able to find their rightful place. Now, we all are moving towards a turning point, after which our fate as a people will be quite different. That fate, as we have already said, may become the fate of a fake state, that is, something that has a name but does not exist. It will be nothing because the purposeless state is nothing and will soon perish. However, it must not happen. There is also another way, where you rely on the source of your core strength that feeds you. It is the source of your inner confidence. External allies also will deal with you accordingly. After the division of the world, there will come a moment when it will be clear who is who. Simulations or provincial cunning will not help. They say, you have no idea how cunning he is. He screws everyone over. He screws the West, Iran, and Russia over. They present the spinelessness and 180-degree U-turns as cunning. It is provincial cunning, and those on the other side know perfectly well who is standing in front of them.
You did not answer my question about whether there may be a point where healthy forces converge.
Life itself will make that purification take place. There is no other way. We have so much mixed the wet and dry so far. Our people have become so conformist, neither forgiving nor punishing, that if we do not, let me tell in plain language for those who want to hear plain language. We had a brilliant period in the history of soccer in Armenia when Nikita Simanyan led Armenia to the pinnacle of success. It would not happen without discipline.
Yes, the team called Ararat.
Right. Without discipline, this very talented team, each member of which was a talented individual and naturally pulled the rope to his side, would not succeed. However, that was the discipline not of a tyrant, but of a man with certain values. I think he is still alive. He was a bearer of values even in Stalin's time. His biography speaks about it. This man brought a certain system of values to Armenia, without which the team would not be disciplined. Being disciplined means obeying certain principles and values. We must build a new government in Armenia based on such principles and values. It must be a transitional democracy, which will establish a constitutional order in the country and later adopt a new constitution. However, they are trying to make a constitution without constitutionalism now because they are unprincipled people.
Դա որոշակի սկզբունքների ենթարկվել է, որոշակի արժեքների ենթարկվել է։ Մենք այդ արժեքներով, եթե պատկերացնենք, այո, Հայաստանի նոր իշխանությունը որ պիտի լինի, ինքը պիտի լինի այդ եւ սա անցումային ժողովրդավարություն, սա չի կարող ժողովրդավարական իշխանություն լինի, անցումային իշխանությունը։ Սա պիտի լինի անցումային ժողովրդավարություն, որտեղ մենք դեռ պիտի անցնենք մի ճանապարհ, որից հետո սահմանադրականություն պիտի լինի երկրում։
Let me ask one more question to close this topic. In one of our interviews, some people sounded like the NDA held demonstrations, which very suspiciously coincided with the rallies of other political forces, particularly with Kocharian's party, which many people call the fifth column. Has the NDA any connections with them or with any other political force? Does it operate separately? Why do people suspect the NDA of having such connections? Is there any such connection? You can say, yes, there is. We are acting together because we have the same goal. You can answer differently. Secondly, they often say that some third forces run the NDA.
The split society and the atmosphere of suspicion, envy, fear, and mutual hatred that reigns in Armenia and the diaspora is our common problem, our misfortune. The enemy helps us not to get out of it. There is no doubt that the whole society should solve that problem and not only one party. If we disappear as a state, as a people, as an identity, and the NDA remains in history only as prophets who predicted what was in store for us for years, what is the benefit of that? The NDA told the people which way to go, but no one listened to us. What is the benefit for us then? No one benefits. Our main goal should be getting out of this situation, and we all have to work our way out of it. For that, we should be faithful to the values they are now trying to discredit. We must preserve and be true to those values in our doings, deeds, and not only words. The NDA is the only force that has never left the square of struggle in the last period. We are constantly present there. If somebody enters the square or leaves, it does not mean that it coincided with our being there or that we wanted it to coincide. We are there and we stand around the values there. Our demands and all we want are written around the opera house.
Do you mean you are always physically there?
We are not just present there. Our fight is ongoing and does not coincide with any other party's actions. We are constantly in progress, no matter who will come and go during that time. Time will show that we are stable. I do not rule out that there will be people who will come from different camps to join the fight for the same values. Our approach is apparent. We have several principles that we will undoubtedly follow. We will go through a transition period, a period of transitional democracy and transitional justice.
Some people say that some third forces from out of Armenia dictate NDA's actions.
I will answer those who keep asking, how do I know whether you are a true force? You have heart and mind. Open them and listen to us. You never know what will happen next when you choose a bride. Am I right? It is never possible to predict for 100%. You might have a suspicion, of course, especially when you hear some gossip. However, you have intellect. God created you with free will, a free mind, and a free heart. Sit and think. Try to figure out who is who. What can I say? How can I convince you? The speaker needs a listener. You have an ear, so listen to what we say. We do not need to justify ourselves. Particularly your audience has the opportunity to listen to us. Let them listen and draw their conclusions. Let them see who is in jail now and what for. Why are those people under arrest? Let them find out why those people fought and why they are back in jail now. Our struggle is not only around the opera house. Our people spend their lives in prison for years. They are glorious, intellectual, elite people. They have proven their loyalty to the ideas and values for which they fought. What other ways are there to find out answers to your question? Is there any other way to know these people?
Many thanks for your answer. I would like to consider with you one more topic as well. We have news on Armenian-Azerbaijani issues. Aliev's right-hand person and assistant Hajiev recently made a statement saying, "Military action is over for Baku, as Azerbaijan has restored its territorial integrity." Moreover, if anyone accuses Azerbaijan of violating international rules or laws, he should know that Azerbaijan acted under the UN Charter, Article 51, which provides for self-defense. Azerbaijan believes that in all the operations carried out until September 2023, Azerbaijan acted within the logic of self-defense. So, how would you react to this version presented by them?
I would like to draw your attention to the fact that in parallel with these statements, the representatives of the ruling CC party in Armenia say that 30 years ago, there was expansionism by Armenia, and they are against such expansionism. In other words, they are pouring water on the mill of Azerbaijan as if Armenians were aggressors. They say Azerbaijan had the right to self-defense. It was their land, and they defended it. Of course, if they ignore the fact that the Soviet army had occupied Armenia, then they can say Azerbaijan was right. Azerbaijan is right that Armenia occupied Artsakh, as the Armenians from Armenia participated in the war, shed blood for that land, destroyed the country, and we have to pay for it. Yesterday, Tagui Gazarian, in her interview with Factor, said, "Well, if we made mistakes, then we will have to pay for those mistakes." She was very clear in her statement. They have discussed this idea among themselves. Can you realize what is going on? In other words, this kind of thinking makes our neighboring country say, "We resorted to self-defense, and we have the right to attack Armenia too because our enclaves are in your country." We should not forget that we still have the problem of enclaves. In reality, both sides have to go to a court of international law. No force should be used yet. Each of us should put the existing documents on the table. They will put the Alexandropol Agreement, the so-called Batumi Agreement, etc. We will bring the documents we have. They are the decision of the League of Nations, the Treaty of Sèvres, and the Wilson Arbitration Award, which is an American law, sealed with an American round seal. Let us bring them to court. Why not do it and discuss it? This is the alternative. If we want peace and do not want war, then let us approach these issues judicially. Why do we give up? Why do we raise our hands and surrender? Why do we say, Azerbaijan is right? Who says they are right? Where is it written? What international law established the Soviet borders? They bring forth the Alma-Ata Declaration. Azerbaijan says that Armenia's supreme body had reservations regarding the Alma-Ata Declaration. They say, regardless the fact of whether you sent those depository papers to Moscow or not, you, as a state, accepted the declaration and committed an attack. Armenia committed aggression and you must accept it. Denazification means eliminating all aggressive actions from the very bottom, nothing else. They say, you must recognize your mistakes. You must declare that all of your heroes were invaders and aggressors. This is the path chosen by our current government. And that is why they repeat what Azerbaijan says. Yes, Azerbaijan relies on UN Article 51 of self-defense and even preventive strikes. So,
and what about the population of Nagorno-Karabakh? Do they have the right to self-defense? Can't we say that Azerbaijan was the attacking side?
I already said that we cut the Artsakh issue from the Armenian cause in the 90s. We said, let's separate this issue from the Armenian cause. We will solve it separately as the Armenian cause is more complicated. It is beyond our power to solve it. Therefore, the Azerbaijanis solved the Artsakh issue in their way, by force, and now they have concentrated on the Armenian cause. They say that the Azerbaijanis have the right to come to Armenia, to live here, to own houses, and to change the laws. Hence, Armenia will become a fake state, because they will surround us from all four sides with corridors and other infrastructures. How can we become stronger in that situation? They have very well thought out the basis on which they guide the issue. Therefore, it is very important that in this fight against the dragon, we see not only the heads of the dragon but also the death of the dragon. We should understand our strengths and weaknesses, as well as the weaknesses of our enemy because they have much weaker identity. That identity has changed its alphabet 4 times during the 20th century. It is based on some religious past from which they have completely cut themselves off. This also applies to Turks. Having cut themselves off from their past, they have completely cut off their roots. They are in a hard situation as regards identity in both Azerbaijan and Turkey, especially if we consider that Iran, which is a country with a very strong identity, has a serious problem with Azerbaijan. This is not only a problem between Azerbaijan and us or between Turkey and us.
To summarize what you said, there are 3 options. We do not know our rights. We do not have rights. We know our rights, but we have no will to exercise them.
First, we must realize that everything begins with the existence of that will. However, the will rests on values. If you are cut off from our values or we are trying to devalue or discredit our values and do nothing to preserve them, no rights will work after that. First, it all starts with natural law. Natural law is based on inner consciousness. If you do not have this consciousness, then you are just a cuckoo or a weed that is afraid not only of bulls but also of sheep.
Thank you for accepting our invitation.